You're listening to Life Repurposed with Michelle Rayburn, where you'll find uplifting and practical advice for everyday living, creative inspiration for do-it-yourself projects, and recommendations for books and resources that will encourage you to embrace your life repurposed. I'm your host, Michelle Rayburn. Welcome to episode number 22 of the Life Repurposed podcast. And if you are listening on audio, you cannot see us, but if you love YouTube or you love Facebook, you will be able to find a video that goes along with this. I have back again Courtney Ellis as my guest, and we're going to be talking about another one of her books and just the story that she went through with making some changes in her life. I feel like this is a amazing fit for my audience because we are all a work in progress, and God can work in some of our messiest stuff. So welcome back, Courtney. I'll have you give us a short introduction. I know if you want to know more about Courtney, you have to go to michellerayburn.com/19 and get episode 19. But Courtney, tell us a little bit about you.
Thanks for having me again. I'm Courtney Ellis. I'm a pastor, a speaker, author of the book Almost Holy Mama, Life-Giving Spiritual Practices for Weary Parents. There it is. And I'm a mom of 3. My oldest is turned 7 at the end of this month. Well, actually, if this airs in November, he's already 7. And I have a 3.5-year-old and a 10-month-old. And yeah, I'm in the midst of the messy bits of parenting right now.
Yeah, so I love the subtitle on the book, Life-Giving Spiritual Practices for Weary Parents. And I feel like no matter where you are in your parenting journey, you could be a weary parent. I'm an empty nester and my kids are both married, but I know some grandparents who are helping to raise their grandchildren. And so I imagine they have some moments they can relate to from your book as well. And for beginning in our Inspired Life section, I'd like Courtney to tell us a little bit about how she came to this Almost Holy Mama story. And if I remember right, it's a 1-year experiment that you did, correct? Using your own life as the petri dish. So her first chapter is running on empty, longing for more. And I think that's a good way to start with you introducing how you came about writing this.
Yeah, I started writing this book when our second baby was just a few weeks old, and I found myself really desperate to connect with Jesus. I needed more Jesus to get through my day. I had a 3.5-year-old and a newborn who was colicky, and I was just really exhausted. And so I'm a big nerd.
That's what makes people say, I think I'll write a book today.
No,
okay.
That's what happened. I'm a big nerd. I started reading books on spiritual practices, right? I was like, I need more of this. The church has done these wonderful spiritual practices for centuries, for thousands of years. Yeah. So there's going to be some help for me here. And all of these books would say things like, take an hour in quiet prayer early in the morning. And I was like, are you crazy? Like my youngest baby was waking up at 4:45 in the morning, like regularly. And he's one of these piece of toast babies who like pops up in the morning like, hello. And there's no soothing him back to sleep. He's just up. And I was like, if I get up at 3:45, I will die. Like I can't do that. And all of these books were full of wisdom, but they were written by men or they were written by monastics, monks and nuns and people who were not caring for small children. And so I was like, where is the book that tells me how to do this without getting up early, that tells me how to do this without finding a quiet hour somewhere, because I don't have one. I just don't have one. And there wasn't one. And so I wrote it. I took the year and I did monthly spiritual practices on my own as a mom, but I didn't do them apart from my daily life. Instead, I paired them with tasks that I had to do anyway. So I started by learning the practice of contemplation while I was in the car. Anytime I was driving with kids and they were immobilized in their car seats, I would contemplate Jesus. I would spend time with Jesus. And I went like that month by month in these spiritual practices, listening prayer with folding laundry. I fasted from Facebook. I
showering.
I wrote
feeding your kids.
Yeah, that was the only time to myself. And I was like, I need time with Jesus. What time do I have? Okay, I have 5 minutes in the shower. That is better than nothing. And it was so transformative because it wasn't the guilty shame. I should have spent an hour in my devotions and I didn't. And now I'm a failure and this is terrible, because so much of parenting is just try hard. And I was exhausted. And spiritual practices are not about trying harder. They're about God just showing up. God's like, I'm here. You're driving. Let's chat. I'm here. You're in the shower. Let's chat. Like, let me help you. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Like, please, yes.
I feel like too often we think we're waiting for him to show up and he's already shown up. And so we're waiting and we're thinking the magical moment is going to come when I have this quiet moment and a beam of light is going to, the sky's going to open and angels are going to sing. And then I'm going to know Jesus is with me.
Right.
And you discovered that he's there in all those mundane moments.
Yeah, that Jesus is in the mac and cheese. And Jesus is in the
That's a book title. You can have it. It's your book.
It was such a relief to find, like, so much of the book was just creating this awareness. And I did a lot of visual reminders because I was so exhausted that I wouldn't remember you guys. But this book was this whole cycle of really succeeding at these spiritual disciplines and failing at them and everything in between, and God meeting me in the ups and in the downs. And there was a moment where the first chapter on contemplation, my only rule was I couldn't have my cell phone at stoplights or anything like that. Like, I just had to talk to Jesus. And like day 15, I'm like, well, I was texting my friend Becky at stoplights because Jesus doesn't text back. And like, I just need to know that's for me. And right, like, I do not succeed, but at the same time, like, I am transformed. And it's been phenomenal to do these practices alone, to do these practices as a family, and to see how just by showing up with God, our rough edges start to be sanded away and the help is right there. Like, God is right there. And I forget so often, and I'm a pastor, so if anyone's feeling guilty about it, it's hard, but God is there.
Yeah, so you use the word spiritual disciplines, and this is something that has come up in some conversations with people. We do a retreat at the camp where we have what we call a discipline of silence for the women. And one day somebody came and talked to me and said, I don't like that word discipline. I saw it on the schedule and it really bothered me. I wondered what's happening. So it's not a word that we use in everyday life. So how would you define, I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't ask you ahead of time, but how would you define spiritual disciplines?
Yeah, the church commonly talks of them as spiritual disciplines. I prefer the word spiritual practices.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit less heavy-handed, and it gives you permission to fail. Like, you practice piano because you're going to make mistakes, and you practice again and you practice
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, but the idea of discipline is not like I discipline my kids when they're naughty. It's like a sports practice. You show up and you show up and you show up. It's the discipline of running. It's the discipline of exercise. It's the discipline of attending to your spiritual life. So it's a discipline in terms of practice, not in terms of you were naughty. But I think you kind of twig on that, and that's why the title is spiritual practices, not spiritual disciplines.
Yeah. That one has a really cool title too, because there's the Bible and the bottle right there. Just the reminder that they together in the moment there. I love that. I'm going to save a question for our next section about how failure is part of developing our faith. But I'm curious to know if there were any fun moments that you had in this experiment where you thought, what am I doing?
Yeah, often, like every month, all the time. But the one that really I was like, what am I doing? During the process of writing the book, we got pregnant with our third child, and this one was a girl. And my body handled a pregnancy with a girl very differently than a pregnancy with a boy. I managed the boys pretty well. I was a little nauseous sometimes, no big deal. With this girl, I was a mess. I was throwing up all the time. And so I got to the point where I couldn't write. I couldn't do any of these spiritual practices. I was just coming home from work and laying in my bed at 6 o'clock. Daryl had to handle, he's a great partner in the housework as it is, but he had to take it all on, and the cooking and cleaning and the childcare. And I was just laying in bed, just this pile of humanity and crying and throwing up. And God was like, this is a spiritual practice. And I was like, no, I hate this one. Like, this is terrible. And I was like, I'm with you in the suffering. And so there's a whole chapter that I didn't intend to write. It was not part of the outline I gave to the publisher on the front end, about suffering and how the discipline of suffering is a place where God can really, really do work in us, because we can't do anything And at their worst, spiritual practices can become this treadmill of trying to earn God's love and be better and try harder. And that's a false gospel. Nowhere in scripture does Jesus say, if you tried a little harder, you would be a little better and I'd love you a little more. And the verse that kept coming to me in this season of just laying in my bed, I could not read my Bible. I could not function. All of the spiritual disciplines were put on hold. My life was put on hold. I would just lay there and eat white rice and drink red Gatorade and then throw that up. That's what I did. And God brought Psalm 23 to my mind. And I have read the Psalm my whole life. I grew up in the church, but the verse that stuck out to me was, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has made me lie down. And God was like, this is, you are going to lie down and all babies come out. This won't be forever. But in this season, stop trying and just let me love you. Just let Daryl love you. Just let your kids love you. Just let your friends text you with encouragement, and you don't even have to text them back. Like, just be here. And it was the hardest part for me, but it was a game changer. It was really a game changer that even in suffering, God meets us, and sometimes meets us more deeply because we can't stiff arm him like we usually do. I had no energy. I was like, okay.
Here you are. You talk in the book about putting holy into every day. And I think that's another word that people might have different perceptions of. So what does that mean to put the holy in every day?
So the biblical concept of holiness is something that's set apart, something that's special. And what I began to learn as I worked in these spiritual practices and they worked on me was that we often draw these false lines between what is spiritual and what is not, right? Going to church is spiritual and taking my kids to soccer is not. And cooking dinner is not spiritual, but praying with a friend is. And God was like, no, like it is all an opportunity to commune with me and to let me love you and let me bless you. And so suddenly I'm washing dishes, and instead of having Netflix going, which I set up on the coffee pot so it doesn't get splashed, instead of Netflix, God is like, hey, I'm here, let's talk. And the opportunity to wash dishes is an opportunity for me to love you. Like, let me love you. Listen to the ways that I want to love you. Putting my kids in bed for the night became this sacred, holy, beautiful act, even when, and this was more often than it should have been, I totally lost my patience because by the end of the day, I have nothing left. But for God to show up with me in those ordinary moments, because one of the hardest things for me about parenting is that so much of it is unseen. Right? That you have these long, exhausting days where you have packed 8,000 snacks and you've changed 47 diapers. And I wrote on Twitter a while back that being a parent is basically just wiping things until your kids go to like noses and bottoms and counters, and that's all I do. But to realize that in those moments, I wasn't unseen, that we serve the God who sees us and who loves us, and not one diaper change happens apart from his love. It was such an affirmation for me in my parenting that when I'm tired at the end of the day, God has seen everything that's gone into that that walk toward exhaustion. And I think sometimes, you're an empty nester, but sometimes that's harder because you're not in the everyday with your kids and you're worrying and you get bits and pieces of what's going on with them and not the whole picture. So that parenting piece never stops. The exhaustion never stops.
Their wives do a really good job of keeping track of them now, so I don't have to worry about them.
They married well.
Yes, they did. I love my daughters-in-law. Yes. So that's a good segue into talking about life repurposed. And so for my listeners, we've been talking right now with Courtney Ellis, and I want you to stay tuned because coming up, she's going to talk about what it means to have some moments where we're not perfect all the time. So for Life Repurposed, I'd like to introduce this segment just asking Courtney a question about failure, because I think this is important for all of us to realize that we don't do it perfect. So how is failure part of developing our faith?
Failure is huge. Failure is huge. You almost don't know how to do a spiritual practice until you've failed good and hard at it. Because anyone can be really good at it for a while. It's what do you do when you've gone through a long season where you haven't read your Bible, or where you don't remember the last time you prayed, or where you knew that God wanted you to do this thing and you did not do that thing, right? That's the key, because it's about showing up again. It's about showing up anew. I talk about this in the book, but I went to Wheaton College and I had this wonderful Christian formation professor, Dr. Tim Larson, who looked out over his class one day, and it was in the middle of Lent, and he's like, are some of you doing Lenten disciplines? Like, have you given up something for Lent? And we're all smiling because we're like very smug college students and we're overachievers, and we're like, yes, we are nailing this Lent thing. And he goes, you don't do Lent well until you fail. Because the purpose of Lent is not to show God how holy you are. The purpose of Lent is to remember that you're a sinner. And maybe y'all need to work on this pride. And we're all like, oh, ow, ow. But that's so key, because we're going to fail and we're going to stumble, and we're going to have days where, a lot of days, really every day, in at least one area where we don't measure up what we had hoped. And the beautiful thing about spiritual practices is that there's tomorrow and there's the next day, and God keeps showing up. And even in those small ups and downs and failures, like, there is forward motion because we're showing up again. And even if that's all we do is show up and say, God, I don't even want to pray to you, that's a prayer. And God can do that. Yeah, the key is, when we fail, not to go into this shame spiral of like, oh, I'm terrible, and why do I even try anymore, right? That's why all the New Year's diets fail. Everyone does great. It's January 21st, and then they fall off the wagon, and then it's worse than it was before. Because if you ate a cupcake, who even are you?
So that's where the almost comes in Almost Holy Mama, right? Because it's not about perfectionism. I actually am a recovering perfectionist. So what would happen for me in the past was I would set out to write a book like you were doing, and I had it all outlined, and I think, okay, I'm going to do a 12-month experiment. And I get into month 3 and I mess it all up. And then I think, well, I didn't do it well enough, so I'm just done, because if I can't do it perfect, I'm not going to do it at all. So when you look at the spiritual practices that you put into your everyday life, what did you do when you had a moment where you realized, okay, I messed this up?
Yeah, well, it was a 12-month experiment, and you'll notice there are 10 experiment chapters in the book. So I did not succeed at my own experiment, because life happened and things shifted, and I started barfing because she was going to make me a little miserable. But what those spiritual practices that I did do started to teach me was that it just was about that continued showing up. You show up today, you show up tomorrow. And if you don't show up for 3 weeks, and you show up after those 3 weeks, God is like, awesome. Like, let's start again. The Lamentations, I love the verse in Lamentations, which is this kind of depressing book of scripture.
I read it recently.
Yes, Lamentations 3 says, the mercies of the Lord are new every morning. Daily bread, daily grace. And so if you show up after 20 years of not talking to Jesus, Jesus is like, awesome, I can work with this. Like, I'm so glad you're here. Sometimes I think we start believing in this gospel of try-harditis, and that God is just a little bit disappointed in us. And if we could try a little harder, he'd love us more. And that's not the God we find in scripture. Right. We find the father of the prodigal son, who the minute the prodigal son starts walking down the road, the father is running him. Like, waiting for you. And what grace and what joy. And I found that as I worked in these spiritual practices, and as they worked on me, coming back became easier. And it wasn't that I failed less. My spiritual muscles did start to get stronger, but I failed just as much. But then the return became easier, because I started to taste that God was really rooting for me, like that God really wanted me to succeed and was cheering me on. And it wasn't the school mom who's kind of sad, like Charlie Brown's teacher, right? Wah, wah, wah. It was Jesus who loves me, who walks with me, who wants to help. Like, I could use help. I need some help. Help would be great.
I think that's why I call this podcast, well, I know that's why I call it Life Repurposed, because it really is about that idea in John 10:10, where Jesus came that we can have life and we can have it to the full. And sometimes that life is just pressing the restart button and saying, okay, I'm ready for another go at this. And just, for me, it's been learning to trust in God's power instead of my own. What has been one of the lessons for you?
One of the lessons for me has been that the spiritual journey really takes place in community. And that surprised me more than maybe it should have. I'm a pastor, right? I preach about community all the time, but I kind of intended to undertake this experiment by myself. And slowly God showed me that when it was in tandem with other people, whether that was my family or my friends, that it was even more life-giving. At the end of the first chapter on contemplation, I was sitting with my friend Anna and my husband Daryl and just saying, I kind of feel like this isn't going to work. I feel like it's been a waste. I've had 30 days and I don't think anything has changed. And they were both like, are you, like, we have seen a change. We have seen a change in you, because sometimes we are our own harshest critics, and we don't see the transformation and the progress. So the more I roped people in, lovingly, the more fun it was, and the easier it was to see progress, and the easier it was to go back to it. We, I think it's chapter 3, eating and the examine. We did this ancient spiritual practice of the examine at the dinner table. And so that was the first one that really involved my family in any sort of explicit way. And the examine was created by the Catholic Jesuit tradition, St. Ignatius of Loyola. And it's just a way of reviewing your day to where did you notice God showing up in your day? And they have a more complicated one that they do, but I had a 4-year-old at the time. So we were like, what was the worst part and where was God in your day? And he was a literalist. So he was like, I didn't see God. I saw my teacher on the playground. And I'm like, no. So we had to kind of explain to him what we meant. But when I would forget at the dinner table, my son Lincoln was like, we got to do the thing. What was the best part of your day? And suddenly it wasn't all on me anymore. Yeah. Their best spiritual practices are never all on us, because they're on God, and God helps us. But when we share that with other people and invite other people into that, it's a whole new ball game, and it can be really lift us up in many different ways.
Did you all find that you were starting to look for God in different ways throughout your day so that you'd have something to talk about at the dinner table?
Yeah, we really did. And it was amazing, because you maybe seen the illustration of the triangle. If God is here and you're here and your spouse is here, as you move closer to God, you also move closer to each other.
True. Mm-hmm.
We shared these deep things that we might not otherwise have mentioned, we were drawing nearer to each other as well. And so I would learn things about Daryl's day that I didn't know, not because he kept it from me, but just because it might have been like he saw a friend when he was at a stoplight and that was a high for him, but he wouldn't have mentioned it in passing. He mentioned it because of the question. And we were able to see some of these tender parts in our son's heart that we knew were there, but it really brought them out. He would pray. He's got a really sweet friend his same age who has cancer, and she came up all the time as the low of his day, not because we'd seen her, but just because she was heavy on his heart. And so it was a great family activity, and we haven't carried on every spiritual practice all the time in the same way, but that's one that we've kept.
That's cool. So as we move into talking about resources, I'd like to talk more about Courtney's book. So hang in with us for a few more minutes, and I'm going to tell you how you can get the book. Okay, so I have Almost Holy Mama here. I will have a link to this on the show notes at michellerayburn.com/22. That's just the number 22 for episode 22. Or you can go to CourtneyBEllis.com. Did I get it right? If you want to go to Courtney's website, she has other resources there, but she also has more information about her books as well. One of the things I love about this book is it's almost like looking at Courtney's journal. You write about it with the same fun that you use in your other book and include some really honest moments. And so you don't sugarcoat some of the titles of it's actually, I should tell people that it's divided into days. So each chapter is a month or roughly a month, right? And there's days as if we're reading Courtney's journal. And so some of the titles are sort of like, I could tell it was like you're there. And that was the most important thing, is you showed up to the journal that day. And then there are other days where she writes more, or here's mornings are hard. They inevitably begin too early, for one thing. So it's just like this open dialogue. I feel like you're sitting across the table from me. You handed me your journal and said, here, read this. We can learn from one another, and that's what I love about the book. So what else would you like readers to know about the takeaways from the book? Because it really isn't all about you. It really is about the reader and how we can experience God's presence in our lives too, correct?
Absolutely. And that's the biggest takeaway from the book, is that anyone can do this. I did it as a busy mom, but you can do it as a busy fill in the blank, whatever it is making you busy in your life. I have a dear friend who's in his 50s, and he's a veterinarian, and he was like, I wish you would have called it something else, because I read it, but I felt weird. He's like, I really liked it, but people were looking at me funny.
Almost holy people.
Guys. Yeah. But those short chapters are really intentional, because I want people to feel that freedom to, I get it. Like, I don't have very much time in my day. So if you got 3 minutes, it's going to fit that. It's on Audible, it's on Kindle. And my publisher actually put this one on Spotify. If you remember Spotify, on Spotify for free. So you can get it there too, because often with little kids, an audiobook is a lot easier than actually reading.
Audiobook with the kids in the car in the back seat.
Totally. And it's all kid safe, right? Like, no profanity. You can listen to it with your children. Totally good.
That's good, because that is one of the problems with getting audiobooks at the library, audiobooks at the library, is you don't know what's in them. So Courtney has certified that you can do this with your kids in the car with you if you want to listen to the audio version. That's awesome.
My grandma is 85, and she helped me edit it, and she signed off on it. So it's really fun.
Well, I love it. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell my listeners about before we sign off?
No, they can actually get the first chapter of either of the books, both of the books, on my website for free. So if you want to taste it before you buy it, it's CourtneyBEllis.com, and first chapter of both of them is up there.
Love that. It has been so much fun talking with you. I hope that sometime when you're in Wisconsin visiting family, that we can figure out a way that we can sit down and have coffee, because I think it would be really fun to do that. So thank you so much for taking time to be with my listeners, to tell some of your story, but ultimately to really touch our hearts so that you can inspire us, knowing that God worked in you and he can work in all of us. So thank you so much for joining me. For my listeners, if you would like to get the show notes, again, it's MichelleRayburn.com/22. And you can find the podcast on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on Google Play, it's on Facebook, it's on all the channels. So I'd love to connect with you somewhere. Look Courtney up, but I know from reading the book that she is not always on social media. So if she doesn't get back to you right away, just hang in there, because she might be on a 30-day fast from social media. Thanks again, and have a great day. You've been listening to Life Repurposed with Michelle Rayburn. Check out tips, resources, and inspiration at MichelleRayburn.com.